The old wooden pew creaked softly under Sarah's weight, a familiar sound in the hushed sanctuary. Sunlight, fractured by stained glass, painted shifting patterns on the worn hymnal in her lap. It had been 6 months since David, her husband of 35 years, had been taken by a sudden, aggressive illness. 6 months of quiet mornings where his coffee mug remained unbreached, of evenings where the other side of the bed felt like a vast, cold continent. The pastor's words from the eulogy, "When the wind whispers your name, do not fear," echoed in the empty space he'd left. She hadn't heard the wind whisper anything but accusations and unanswered questions since then. Grief was a heavy cloak, suffocating and all-consuming, and in its suffocating embrace, the whispers of God had been silenced, replaced by the deafening roar of her own sorrow. She traced the faded gold lettering on the hymnal, a desperate search for solace in familiar verses that now felt alien, distant. The hope that had once buoyed her spirit had been shipwrecked on the shores of loss, leaving her adrift in a sea of despair. But as the service concluded, a subtle shift occurred. A young woman, a stranger, approached her, her eyes brimming with understanding. "I lost my husband 2 years ago," she offered softly, her voice a gentle balm. "The first year is the hardest, but there is a strength you haven't found yet, even if you can't see it." This small, unexpected connection, a flicker of shared humanity in the vast darkness, was the first hint that perhaps she wasn't entirely alone in this profound solitude. It was in this moment of vulnerability, reaching out through her own pain, that she inadvertently offered a lifeline to others who might be navigating similar storms. If you felt this echo of loss and are searching for a glimmer of hope, please subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of faith's enduring power. The woman, whose name Sarah learned was Emily, spoke of small victories. The first time she'd managed to cook a meal for herself without crying. The day she'd opened a window and felt the sun on her face, truly felt it, without it feeling like a cruel mockery of her sadness. Sarah listened, a knot of skepticism tightening in her chest. These were not victories. They were mere respites from an unbearable war. She remembered David's laughter, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the comforting weight of his arm around her shoulders. These memories, once a source of joy, now felt like exquisite torture, constant reminders of what was irrevocably gone. The house, once filled with their shared life, now felt cavernous and echoing with his absence. Every object, from the worn armchair he favored to the stack of his favorite books on the nightstand, was a monument to her loss. She would often find herself standing in the hallway, her hand outstretched, as if expecting to feel his presence, only to be met by the cold, unyielding emptiness. Her faith, once a sturdy pillar, had crumbled into dust, each grain a painful reminder of unanswered prayers and a God who seemed to have turned his back. She questioned everything. Her understanding of divine love and purpose shattered into a million sharp fragments. How could a loving God allow such pain, such profound devastation? The theological explanations offered by well-meaning friends felt like platitudes, hollow reassurances that offered no real comfort in the face of her raw, visceral grief. She wondered if she was being punished, if some unconfessed sin had led to this crushing weight of sorrow. Emily, sensing Sarah's unspoken turmoil, gently shared her own journey. "I used to look for signs," she admitted, her gaze distant, remembering. Big, flashing neon signs from heaven. But God's presence isn't always a thunderclap. Sometimes it's a quiet knowing, a gentle nudge in the right direction. It's in the kindness of strangers, the unexpected resilience you find within yourself. Sarah found herself nodding, a flicker of something akin to curiosity stirring within the layers of her sorrow. She'd always been a woman of quiet faith, her relationship with God nurtured in the simple routines of prayer and church attendance. But this was different. This was a wrestling match, a desperate plea for understanding in the face of an incomprehensible void. The silence that followed David's departure had been the most terrifying aspect. It wasn't just the absence of his voice, but the perceived absence of any divine response. She remembered a particular night, weeks after the funeral, when she'd knelt by her bedside, tears streaming down her face, begging for any sign, any confirmation that she wasn't utterly abandoned. The silence that greeted her pleas was as vast and as deep as the ocean. She felt like a ship lost at sea, its captain vanished, its compass broken, with no land in sight. This profound feeling of abandonment was the bedrock of her despair, a constant, gnawing ache that permeated every aspect of her existence. Sarah recalled conversations with David, their shared dreams for their future, now rendered impossible. They had planned to travel, to finally visit Italy, a lifelong aspiration. They'd spoken of retiring to a small cottage by the sea, of spending their golden years watching the waves and reading to each other. These were not grand ambitions, but the quiet, steady hum of a life well lived, built on shared hopes and unwavering companionship. Now the very thought of Italy brought a fresh wave of tears, a stark reminder of the life she had lost, the future that would never be. The financial strain was also a growing concern. David had been the primary breadwinner, and while she had always managed the household finances, she now faced the daunting task of navigating mortgages, insurance, and long-term investments alone. The stability she had always taken for granted had evaporated, leaving her vulnerable and anxious about the unknown. She felt a pang of guilt for even considering these practical worries, as if her grief should be all-consuming, leaving no room for such mundane concerns. Yet the reality of her situation pressed down on her, a tangible weight that added to the emotional burden. The world kept turning, bills continued to arrive, and the need to manage her new reality was a constant, unwelcome distraction from her mourning. She felt a profound disconnect between the emotional turmoil within her and the practical demands of the world outside. She'd tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, forcing herself to attend her book club, to go grocery shopping, to engage in conversations that felt like elaborate performances. But her heart wasn't in it. Her mind was constantly replaying David's final days, the hushed hospital corridors, the sterile smell of disinfectant, the agonizing realization that their time together was drawing to a close. The image of his hand, once so strong and familiar, now frail and unresponsive in hers, haunted her waking hours and invaded her dreams. She found herself scrutinizing every interaction, searching for hidden meanings, for clues that she might have missed. Did she say the right things? Did she hold his hand tight enough? Was there something more she could have done? These questions, devoid of answers, circled endlessly in her mind, feeding her guilt and reinforcing her sense of helplessness. The weight of unspoken words, of regrets, of moments that could have been different, pressed down on her, a suffocating burden. She longed for a sign, any sign, that her suffering had a purpose, that it was not simply a random act of cruelty, but a part of some larger divine plan. But the silence persisted, a deafening testament to her isolation. One rainy afternoon, Sarah was rummaging through an old box of David's belongings. It was a task she'd been avoiding for weeks, dreading the flood of memories each item would inevitably trigger. She found old photographs, letters from his childhood, and a worn, leather-bound journal. Hesitantly, she opened it. The pages were filled with his familiar, neat handwriting, but the content surprised her. It wasn't a diary of daily events, but a collection of his thoughts and prayers, reflections on his faith and his hopes for their future. One entry, dated just a few months before his illness, caught her eye. "Lord," it began, "I pray for Sarah's strength, for her peace. May she always feel your presence, even when I am no longer by her side. Grant her the wisdom to see your hand in all things and the courage to trust your plan, even when it seems unfathomable." Sarah's breath hitched. David had known. He had somehow foreseen her future struggles and had prayed for her strength, for her peace. It was a posthumous gift, a beacon of love and foresight that pierced through the fog of her despair. She clutched the journal to her chest, tears blurring the words on the page. It wasn't a neon sign, but it was a whisper, a profound and personal message from the man she loved, and a subtle, undeniable affirmation of a divine presence she had so desperately doubted. This unexpected revelation ignited a spark of something she hadn't felt in months: gratitude. The journal became Sarah's solace. She read it every day, absorbing David's quiet faith, his unwavering trust in God, even when faced with uncertainty. He wrote about the small miracles he witnessed: a stranger's kindness, a beautiful sunset, the resilience of nature after a storm. He didn't dismiss hardship, but he always framed it within the context of God's overarching plan. He spoke of a divine tapestry where every thread, even the dark ones, contributed to the beauty of the whole. This metaphor resonated deeply with Sarah. She had been so focused on the ripped threads of her own life, on the gaping holes left by David's absence, that she had failed to see the larger picture. David's words offered a new perspective, a way to reframe her pain not as a sign of abandonment, but as a potentially integral part of a divine design she couldn't yet comprehend. She began to notice the small miracles David had written about: a spontaneous conversation with a neighbor that lifted her spirits for an entire afternoon, the unexpected appearance of a rainbow after a particularly bleak day, even the persistent chirping of the sparrows outside her window, a constant cheerful sound that had previously gone unnoticed. These weren't earth-shattering events, but they were gentle reminders, subtle nudges that perhaps she wasn't as alone as she believed. One particularly difficult evening, Sarah found herself staring at a photograph of her and David on their wedding day. His eyes, full of love and youthful optimism, seemed to hold a promise of forever. The stark contrast between that vibrant image and her current reality was almost unbearable. She crumpled to the floor, the familiar ache of grief overwhelming her. She cried out, not in anger this time, but in a raw, unadulterated plea for understanding. "David," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "Why did this happen? Why me?" As if in response, a gentle breeze rustled the curtains, and a single dried rose petal, from a bouquet David had given her years ago, drifted down from the bookshelf and landed on the open page of his journal, right next to the entry about praying for her strength. It was a small thing, insignificant to anyone else, but to Sarah it felt like a direct answer. It was a tangible connection to their shared past, a reminder of their enduring love, and a quiet affirmation that even in her deepest despair she was seen. This moment, devoid of grand pronouncements, was more powerful than any sermon. It was a whisper of love, a tangible piece of their history that had been preserved, now delivered by the very wind that had once whispered its ominous pronouncements at David's wake. Sarah carefully picked up the rose petal, its delicate form a testament to its age. She placed it back on David's journal, a silent promise to herself that she would try to see the world through his eyes, to look for the beauty and the grace he had so consistently found. The next morning, she woke with a new resolve. The grief was still present, a dull ache that would likely never fully disappear, but it no longer felt like an all-consuming void. She decided to revisit Emily, the woman from the funeral. She needed to talk to someone who understood the specific landscape of widowhood, someone who had navigated these treacherous waters and emerged, not unscathed, but with a hard-won resilience. She remembered Emily's quiet strength, her compassionate gaze, and the genuine empathy that had radiated from her. Sarah realized that her isolation had been self-imposed, a shield against further pain that had ultimately kept her from healing. Reaching out was an act of courage, a step towards reclaiming a life that felt irrevocably shattered. She picked up the phone, her hand trembling slightly, and dialed the number Emily had given her. It was a small act, a seemingly insignificant decision, but in that moment, it felt like a monumental leap of faith, a willingness to engage with the world again, however tentatively. Emily welcomed Sarah with open arms. Her home was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and the soft glow of lamplight. They sat for hours, Sarah pouring out her heart, recounting the story of the rose petal, the journal, the crushing weight of her loss. Emily listened without judgment, offering only her quiet presence and occasional words of encouragement. "It's okay to feel lost, Sarah," Emily said gently. "Grief doesn't follow a timeline. It's a messy, unpredictable journey, but you're not alone in it. The fact that you're talking about it, that you're reaching out, is a sign of incredible strength." Emily shared more of her own story, of the years of despair that followed her husband's death, of the gradual process of rebuilding her life, brick by painful brick. She spoke of the importance of self-compassion, of allowing herself to grieve without shame or guilt. She emphasized that healing wasn't about forgetting David, but about learning to live with his absence, about integrating his memory into a new life. Sarah found a profound sense of relief in Emily's understanding. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted, replaced by the comforting warmth of shared experience. The silence that had once been so terrifying now seemed less absolute, punctuated by the gentle cadence of Emily's voice and the shared rhythm of their breathing. Inspired by Emily's resilience, Sarah began to explore small acts of self-care. She started with simple things, taking a walk in the park, listening to music, reading books that weren't related to grief. She even began to experiment with cooking again, not for anyone else, but for herself, rediscovering the quiet satisfaction of creating something nourishing. One afternoon, while browsing in a small local bookstore, she stumbled upon a collection of poetry by Rumi. The verses spoke of love, loss, and the divine, resonating with a depth that startled her. One particular poem, titled The Guest House, struck her profoundly. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house of all its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The words were a revelation. She realized that her resistance to her emotions, her constant battle against the darkness, had only amplified its power. Rumi's wisdom offered a different path: acceptance, not resignation. It was a call to embrace the full spectrum of human experience, to allow the guest of sorrow to visit, knowing that its presence was temporary and that it might, in fact, be clearing space for something new. Sarah began to practice welcoming her emotions, even the most painful ones. She would sit with her sadness, acknowledge it, and then, as Rumi suggested, offer it a cup of tea. It was a strange and often difficult process, but slowly, a subtle shift occurred. The intensity of her despair began to lessen. The sharp edges of her grief softened, replaced by a more profound melancholic ache. She found that by allowing herself to feel, she was less overwhelmed by her emotions. They no longer felt like uncontrollable forces that threatened to drown her, but like passing visitors, each with its own lesson to impart. This newfound ability to sit with her feelings, rather than flee from them, was a significant step in her healing journey. It was a quiet act of defiance against the paralysis of her grief, a reclaiming of her inner landscape. She started to notice the subtle beauty in the world around her again. The intricate patterns of frost on her window pane, the vibrant hues of autumn leaves, the comforting aroma of coffee brewing in the morning. These were small moments of grace, easily overlooked when consumed by sorrow. But now they became anchors, grounding her in the present moment and reminding her of the life that continued to unfold even in the midst of her loss. One day, Sarah decided to visit their old vacation cabin, a place filled with countless happy memories of David. It had been too painful to go there before, but now she felt a pull, a quiet invitation to confront the memories directly. As she drove, she noticed a billboard by the side of the road, advertising a local community center offering grief support groups. She had dismissed such groups before, thinking they were for people who couldn't cope on their own. But something about this billboard, the simple, straightforward message, resonated with her. "Find strength in shared stories," it read. Sarah considered it for a moment, the idea of sharing her burden with others who understood. It was a daunting prospect, but also a hopeful one. She wondered if she could find not just solace, but perhaps even a renewed sense of purpose by connecting with others who were experiencing similar losses. The thought of speaking her pain aloud, of articulating her grief in a safe and supportive environment, felt both terrifying and liberating. She made a mental note to look up the community center's website when she got back home, a small seed of possibility planted in the fertile ground of her emerging hope. Upon arriving at the cabin, Sarah was struck by the silence. It was a different kind of silence than the one in her house. It was a peaceful silence, filled with the rustling of leaves and the gentle murmur of a nearby creek. She walked through the rooms, her fingers tracing the familiar patterns on the furniture, the worn edges of the fireplace mantel. She found a small wooden music box on a shelf. It was a gift David had given her years ago, and it played a soft, melodic tune that always soothed her. She wound it up, and the familiar melody filled the cabin. As the music played, a wave of memories washed over her. Laughter by the fireplace, quiet evenings reading side by side, their shared dreams whispered under starry skies. This time, however, the memories didn't bring the sharp stab of pain. Instead, they brought a gentle warmth, a sense of profound gratitude for the love they had shared. She realized that these memories were not just reminders of what she had lost, but also testaments to the richness of the life they had built together. The cabin, once a symbol of her loss, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could honor David's memory and begin to embrace her own future. That evening, Sarah sat by the fireplace, the music box playing softly beside her. She opened David's journal again and read his words about trusting God's plan, even when it seemed unfathomable. She realized that she had been so focused on the unfathomable aspect of her loss that she had missed the trust part. David had trusted, even when he didn't fully understand. He had found peace in his faith, a steadfast anchor in the storm. Sarah realized that her faith, too, could be that anchor. It wasn't about having all the answers, but about holding on to the one who did. She thought about the rose petal, the whisper of the wind, the music box playing its familiar tune. These weren't grand miracles, but they were subtle confirmations, gentle reminders of a presence that had never truly left her. They were evidence that God's love, like David's, was enduring and steadfast, even in the face of life's most profound challenges. She whispered a prayer, not of desperation this time, but of quiet surrender and profound gratitude, a prayer that echoed David's own sentiments of trust and acceptance. The next day, Sarah returned home and immediately looked up the community center. She found information about their grief support group and with trembling fingers signed up for their next meeting. The thought of walking into that room, of sharing her story with strangers, filled her with trepidation. But she held on to the memory of David's words, of Rumi's wisdom, and of Emily's quiet strength. She knew that growth often happens outside of our comfort zones. She decided to go, not with the expectation of instant healing, but with an openness to connection and understanding. She packed a small bag, including David's journal and the dried rose petal, a tangible link to the love and faith that had sustained her thus far. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the doorway, taking a deep breath. It felt like stepping onto a new path, a path she hadn't chosen, but was now determined to walk with courage and grace. She knew that this step, however small, was a significant one in her journey of rediscovery, a willingness to seek out support and community in her time of need. The first grief group meeting was held in a small, unassuming room at the community center. Sarah arrived early, her heart pounding in her chest. The other attendees were a mix of men and women, their faces etched with varying degrees of sorrow and resilience. As they introduced themselves, Sarah heard stories of loss that mirrored her own. The sudden death of a spouse, the lingering illness of a parent, the accidental drowning of a child. Each story was a testament to the fragility of life and the enduring strength of the human spirit. When it was Sarah's turn, she spoke hesitantly at first, her voice trembling as she recounted the details of David's passing, the subsequent emptiness, and her struggle to find faith. She spoke of the journal, the rose petal, and the music box, sharing the small moments that had begun to rekindle a flicker of hope within her. She didn't shy away from her pain, but she also spoke of the growing sense of peace she was finding, of the lessons she was learning about resilience and the quiet presence of God in her life. As she spoke, she noticed a palpable sense of shared understanding in the room, a collective nod of recognition and empathy. A woman named Margaret, who had lost her husband to cancer 3 years prior, shared her experience of finding solace in volunteering at a local animal shelter. "Taking care of something else," she explained, her voice gentle, "helped me to feel useful again. It gave me a reason to get out of bed in the morning, a purpose beyond my own sorrow." Another member, a young man named David, a coincidence that brought a soft smile to Sarah's lips, spoke about reconnecting with his estranged father after years of silence. "I realized," he said, his gaze earnest, "that life is too short for regrets. I had to reach out, to mend the broken pieces before it was too late. These stories, each unique in its circumstances, shared a common thread: the act of reaching out, of seeking connection, of finding purpose beyond personal pain. Sarah listened intently, absorbing their wisdom and their resilience. She saw in their experiences a roadmap for her own journey, a testament to the fact that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a meaningful future, piece by piece, with courage and compassion. Sarah found herself looking forward to the weekly grief group meetings. They were a sanctuary, a place where she could be vulnerable without fear of judgment. She discovered that sharing her story, articulating her pain, didn't make her weaker, it made her stronger. It allowed her to process her emotions, to gain perspective, and to feel a profound sense of connection with others who understood the unique landscape of loss. She learned from their experiences, their coping mechanisms, and their unwavering faith. She began to see her own journey not as a solitary struggle, but as part of a larger tapestry of human experience. The group became a vital support system, a circle of empathy and understanding that helped her navigate the complexities of grief. She started to feel a sense of belonging, a community that embraced her in her brokenness and celebrated her small victories. This newfound sense of connection was a powerful antidote to the isolation she had felt for so long, a testament to the healing power of shared vulnerability and genuine human connection. One afternoon, Sarah was talking with Margaret about her financial worries. Margaret, with her practical wisdom, suggested that Sarah consider offering her skills as a freelance editor. "You've always had a way with words, Sarah," she said, "and you're so meticulous. Perhaps it's something you could do from home, at your own pace." The idea had a certain appeal. Sarah had always enjoyed editing, finding satisfaction in refining and clarifying written text. It felt like a way to use her talents, to regain a sense of control and independence in her life, and to rebuild her financial stability. It wasn't the grand adventure she and David had planned, but it was a step forward, a practical solution to a pressing concern. She decided to explore the possibility, researching freelance platforms and updating her resume. It felt like a daunting task, but the prospect of reclaiming some financial autonomy, of re-engaging with her professional capabilities, offered a glimmer of hope. This idea, born from a shared conversation, began to transform from a vague possibility into a concrete plan, a tangible step towards rebuilding her life on her own terms. Sarah started taking on small editing projects from home. The work was challenging, but also incredibly rewarding. Each completed project brought a sense of accomplishment, a tangible reminder that she was capable, that she could still contribute and thrive, even in the face of her profound loss. She found that the focus required for editing helped to quiet the anxieties that often plagued her. It was a form of active meditation, a way to channel her energy into something productive and meaningful. She discovered that she was good at it, that her attention to detail and her keen understanding of language were valuable assets. This rediscovery of her professional self was a significant turning point in her healing journey. It was not about replacing David, but about rebuilding a part of herself that had been dormant, about finding new avenues for self-expression and personal fulfillment. The work provided a sense of structure to her days, a gentle rhythm that helped to anchor her in the present and to move forward with a renewed sense of purpose and confidence. As Sarah's editing business began to grow, she found herself interacting with a diverse range of clients. One client, a young author struggling with self-doubt, particularly resonated with her. He had poured his heart and soul into his manuscript, but he was terrified of criticism, of not being good enough. Sarah, drawing on her own experiences with vulnerability and perseverance, offered him not only professional editing, but also words of encouragement and support. She shared her own story of overcoming doubt, of finding her voice again after loss. Her empathy and understanding created a strong bond between them. He found comfort in her wisdom and her unwavering belief in his potential. This relationship, forged through shared creative endeavors and mutual vulnerability, became a source of unexpected joy and fulfillment for Sarah. It was a reminder that even in the midst of personal pain, she could still offer strength and inspiration to others, creating a ripple effect of positivity and hope. One evening, Sarah found herself walking through the park, a place she and David had often frequented. The setting sun cast a warm, golden glow on the trees, and the air was filled with the gentle chirping of crickets. She sat on their favorite bench, a pang of nostalgia in her heart. She opened David's journal, not to find answers, but simply to feel his presence, to connect with the love they had shared. As she read, a young couple walked by, their laughter echoing through the quiet park. They were holding hands, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the setting sun, a picture of youthful love and happiness. For a fleeting moment, Sarah felt a twinge of sadness, a yearning for what she had lost. But then, a different emotion surfaced, a gentle sense of peace, a recognition of the enduring beauty of love in all its forms. She realized that her love for David, though transformed by loss, was still a vibrant part of her. It was a love that had shaped her, strengthened her, and continued to guide her. The park, once a symbol of shared memories, now also represented the ongoing cycle of life, the continuous unfolding of love and connection, and the quiet assurance that even in endings, there are always new beginnings. Sarah continued to nurture her faith, not as a desperate plea for intervention, but as a quiet, unwavering trust. She started attending a small Bible study group, drawn by the intimacy and the shared exploration of Scripture. She found herself connecting with the verses in a new way, not as distant pronouncements, but as living, breathing words that offered guidance and comfort for her everyday life. The group's discussions often revolved around themes of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of God's love. She learned that faith wasn't about avoiding suffering, but about finding strength and meaning within it. She discovered that God's presence wasn't always in the grand miracles, but often in the quiet moments of peace, the unexpected moments of joy, and the unwavering support of community. This shift in her understanding of faith was profound. It moved from a belief in a distant deity to a felt experience of a loving, ever-present God who walked with her through every step of her journey, even when she felt most alone. One of the young authors Sarah worked with, a woman named Clara, was preparing for a major book launch. Clara was experiencing immense pressure and self-doubt, her fear of failure threatening to overshadow her excitement. Sarah, remembering her own struggles with anxiety after David's death, offered Clara not just editing expertise, but also her own hard-won wisdom. She shared how she had learned to navigate her fears, to trust in her own capabilities, and to lean on her faith during times of uncertainty. She encouraged Clara to focus on her passion for storytelling, to embrace the journey, and to believe in the power of her own voice. Clara, deeply moved by Sarah's empathy and encouragement, felt a surge of renewed confidence. Sarah's words, born from her own journey of loss and rediscovery, resonated deeply with Clara, empowering her to face her challenges with courage and optimism. This exchange, a simple act of mentorship and shared vulnerability, highlighted Sarah's growing capacity to offer healing and inspiration to others, even as she continued her own. Sarah began to notice a recurring theme in her dreams. She would often see David, not as he was in his final days, but as he was in his prime, vibrant, healthy, and full of life. In these dreams, he would often smile at her, a gentle, knowing smile, and then fade away, leaving her with a sense of peace and contentment. She also began to experience moments of profound clarity, where she would feel a strong, undeniable sense of David's presence, a comforting assurance that he was still with her in spirit. These were not mournful visitations, but gentle affirmations, whispers from beyond that reminded her of their enduring connection. She understood these dreams and feelings not as illusions, but as subtle messages from the spiritual realm, a confirmation that love transcends physical absence. They became a source of solace, reinforcing her belief that while David was no longer physically present, their bond remained unbroken, a testament to the eternal nature of love and connection. One day, while browsing through an old photo album, Sarah came across a picture of her and David at a local charity event, years before his illness. They were surrounded by people, their faces alight with the joy of giving back. Sarah remembered how much that event had meant to David, his deep conviction about the importance of helping others. A new idea began to form in her mind. She decided to honor David's legacy by starting a small foundation in his name, dedicated to supporting local community initiatives that he had cared about. This would not only keep his memory alive, but also provide a tangible way for her to contribute to the world and to find purpose beyond her own grief. The idea ignited a spark within her, a sense of renewed mission and a way to channel her energy into something meaningful and lasting. She began to research the legal aspects of establishing a foundation, her heart filled with a quiet determination and a sense of calling. Sarah's new endeavor, the David Sterling Foundation, began to take shape. She started by organizing a small fundraising event, a garden party at her home, inviting friends, family, and members of her grief support group. The response was overwhelming. People were eager to contribute, to honor David's memory, and to support the causes he held dear. Sarah found immense joy in planning the event, in connecting with people who had known and loved David, and in sharing his story with a new generation. She realized that by focusing on his legacy, she was not only keeping his memory alive, but also creating a positive impact on the world around her. The foundation became more than just a memorial. It became a living testament to David's values and a source of ongoing purpose for Sarah. It was a way for her to continue their shared dream of making a difference, even after his physical absence. The garden party was a resounding success. Laughter filled the air, stories of David were shared, and the spirit of generosity flowed freely. Sarah, watching the guests mingle and connect, felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. She saw how David's life, though cut short, had touched so many others, and how his legacy continued to inspire and unite people. She realized that while she had lost her husband, she had gained so much more: a deeper understanding of herself, a stronger connection to her faith, a supportive community, and a renewed sense of purpose. She saw that grief, though a painful journey, could also be a catalyst for transformation, a doorway to a richer, more meaningful life. The event was not just a fundraiser. It was a celebration of David's life and a testament to the enduring power of love and hope. As the months turned into years, Sarah continued to manage the David Sterling Foundation, its impact growing steadily. She established scholarships for underprivileged students, supported local art programs, and contributed to environmental conservation efforts, all causes close to David's heart. Her work with the foundation brought her immense satisfaction, a deep sense of purpose that filled the void left by David's passing. She had not just survived her loss, she had transformed it into a powerful force for good. She often thought of David, not with the sharp sting of grief, but with a warm, abiding love and a profound sense of gratitude for the life they had shared and the enduring legacy they had created together. Her own personal growth, intertwined with the foundation's success, became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of turning pain into purpose. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah found herself standing by the creek near their old cabin, the same creek that had whispered its gentle secrets to her years ago. The leaves were ablaze in hues of red and gold, a breathtaking spectacle of nature's enduring beauty. She opened David's journal one last time, not to seek solace, but to offer a silent prayer of thanksgiving. She thought of the journey she had taken, from the depths of despair to a place of quiet strength and purpose. She had lost her husband, her anchor, but in his absence, she had found a deeper connection to herself, to her faith, and to the world around her. She had learned that even in the darkest of times, there is always a glimmer of hope, a whisper of divine presence, and the enduring strength of love. The silence that once terrified her. The old church pew creaked beneath Eleanor's weight, a familiar sound that usually brought a sense of peace. Today, however, it amplified the silence, the deafening absence where Arthur's booming laughter used to fill the space beside her. 60 years. 60 years they'd sat in this very spot, side by side, weathering storms and celebrating sunshine. Now the sunshine felt like a cruel mockery, blindingly bright against the perpetual twilight of her grief. The pastor's words, meant to be a balm, had flitted around her like disoriented moths, landing nowhere near the raw wound in her soul. "When the wind whispers your name, do not fear," he'd said at the wake. But the wind, when it blew through the ancient oaks outside, only seemed to carry Arthur's final, rasping breath. It whispered emptiness, not solace. Eleanor squeezed her eyes shut, the rough wood of the hymnal digging into her palms. She'd always been a woman of faith, her belief a sturdy oak that had sheltered her through countless trials. But this felt like the roots had been ripped from the earth, leaving her exposed and shivering. She remembered the whispered promises of God, the gentle nudges she'd always felt in her heart, guiding her, comforting her. Where were they now? Had the finality of Arthur's departure also severed her connection to the divine? The air in the sanctuary, thick with the scent of lilies and the unspoken sorrow of others, pressed down on her. She yearned for a sign, any sign, that she wasn't utterly alone in this vast, aching wilderness. If you find yourself in similar moments of profound loss, where faith feels distant and hope a forgotten language, remember you are not alone. Share your story in the comments below. Let us build a community of shared strength and understanding. We're here to listen and to remind each other that even in the deepest valleys, light can be found. She walked out of the church into the blinding afternoon sun, the stark brightness making her flinch. The world outside seemed so normal. Cars honked, children shrieked in a distant park, and a young couple strolled hand in hand, their laughter echoing the joy Eleanor had once known so intimately. It felt offensive, this continuation of life, this vibrant pulse that refused to acknowledge the chasm Arthur's passing had torn through her existence. Her old Ford, a faithful companion for over a decade, waited in the gravel lot. As she opened the door, the worn leather of the driver's seat offered no comfort, only a sharp reminder of the journeys they'd taken together. Arthur always drove, his large hands sure on the wheel, his voice a constant, melodic presence. Now, she was alone, facing an unknown road. The miles stretched before her, a blur of unfamiliar landscapes and an even more unfamiliar future. She fumbled for the ignition, her fingers stiff and uncooperative. The engine sputtered to life, a hesitant cough that mirrored her own internal struggle. She pulled out of the parking lot, her gaze fixed on the horizon, a vague destination in mind. Her sister's house, a few towns over. But her mind wasn't on the destination. It was adrift, caught in the undertow of memories. She saw Arthur's smile, heard his chuckle, felt the warmth of his hand in hers. These were echoes, spectral remnants of a life that was no more. How was she supposed to navigate this new reality, this silent, solitary existence? The question hung heavy in the car, unanswered. The first few days at her sister's were a blur of well-meaning condolences and forced smiles. Martha, bless her heart, tried her best, preparing meals Eleanor couldn't eat, and offering words of comfort that felt like smooth stones skipped across a deep, dark lake. Eleanor appreciated the effort truly, but she felt like an alien in a land of the living. She'd sit by the window for hours, watching the world go by, feeling utterly detached. Her faith, once the anchor of her life, felt like a distant shore, receding with every passing wave of sorrow. She'd try to pray, to find those familiar words that had always soothed her, but they felt hollow, meaningless. It was like trying to speak a language she no longer understood. She remembered Arthur's quiet strength, his unwavering belief that even in the darkest hours, there was a purpose. He'd often say, "Eleanor, even when the storm rages, the lighthouse still stands." But she couldn't see the lighthouse anymore. All she saw was the storm, a tempest of grief that threatened to drown her. She found herself rereading old letters, not for comfort, but for a desperate search for answers, for a clue as to how to bridge this chasm. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of Arthur's belongings, Eleanor found a small, worn, leather-bound journal. It wasn't his usual diary, filled with mundane daily entries. This was different. The pages were filled with his thoughts, his reflections, his prayers. He wrote about his own struggles, his own moments of doubt, his own fears. He confessed to feeling inadequate, to questioning God's plan, especially during difficult times. Eleanor sank onto the floor, the journal open in her lap, tears blurring the ink. Arthur, her strong, steadfast Arthur, had felt this way too. She'd always seen him as a pillar of faith, unshakable. This discovery chipped away at the image of him she'd held so dear. But in its place, something more profound began to emerge. A recognition of his humanity, his own deep struggles. He wrote about a time when their youngest, David, had been gravely ill and how he'd felt utterly abandoned by God. He described the gnawing emptiness, the desperate pleading for a sign, any sign, that he was not alone. This wasn't the invincible man she'd thought him to be. This was a man wrestling with the same questions that were now consuming her. Arthur's journal entries weren't just a record of his struggles. They were a testament to his persistence. He wrote about how, even in his darkest moments, he would find small glimmers of hope. He described a time when he was overwhelmed with anxiety about a business venture, convinced it would fail and devastate their family. He'd spent a sleepless night, pacing their living room, the weight of responsibility crushing him. In the pre-dawn quiet, he'd walked out onto the porch, the air cool and still. He remembered noticing a single, impossibly bright star, shining with an intensity that seemed to defy the surrounding darkness. He wrote, "It was just a star, Eleanor, just a star." But in that moment, it felt like a whispered promise. It reminded me that even in the deepest night, there is light. And if there is light, there is hope. He didn't claim it was a divine revelation, but he admitted that that simple observation had shifted something within him, allowing him to face the day with a renewed sense of peace. Eleanor traced the words with her finger, a faint stir of something other than sorrow beginning to bloom in her chest. It was a fragile thing, this burgeoning hope, but it was there. The journal became Eleanor's constant companion. She'd reread Arthur's words in the quiet hours of the night, finding a strange comfort in his honesty. He wasn't offering platitudes, he was offering shared experience. He wrote about the fear that would grip him when he thought about growing old alone, about losing his vitality, about becoming a burden. He detailed his prayers, not always eloquent, but always fervent, a raw outpouring of his heart to the heavens. He spoke of specific instances where, in his moments of deepest despair, a subtle shift would occur. It wasn't a booming voice from the sky, but a quiet knowing, a gentle nudge in a new direction, a sudden clarity that allowed him to see a path forward where before there had only been a wall. He described these moments not as miracles, but as grace, as the persistent, quiet presence of God working through the ordinary. Eleanor found herself looking for these subtle shifts in her own life, desperately wanting to feel that gentle nudge. The world still felt heavy, the ache of Arthur's absence a constant throb, but the crushing despair was beginning to recede, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. What if Arthur was right? What if God's presence wasn't always a grand spectacle, but a quiet whisper in the storm? She started taking small walks, at first just around Martha's garden, then further down the quiet country lanes. She observed the world with a newfound attention, a conscious effort to look for what Arthur had called whispered promises. She noticed the tenacity of a single daisy pushing through a crack in the pavement, the intricate patterns of frost on a fallen leaf, the way the sunlight dappled through the branches of the oak trees, painting shifting mosaics on the forest floor. These were small things, easily overlooked, but she began to see them through Arthur's eyes, as tiny miracles, as evidence of a beauty that persisted, even in the face of decay. One morning, while walking by a small, babbling brook, she saw a kingfisher, its iridescent blue plumage a flash of vibrant color against the muted tones of the winter landscape. It dove, disappearing beneath the water for a moment, and then emerged, a small fish wriggling in its beak. It was a simple act of survival, a predator at work, but something about the kingfisher's fierce determination, its perfect execution, struck Eleanor deeply. It was a testament to the enduring power of life, to the intricate dance of existence that continued regardless of her personal sorrow. These observations, these small encounters with nature, began to chip away at her overwhelming sense of loss. She wasn't miraculously cured of her grief, but the sharp edges were beginning to soften. She started to understand what Arthur meant by looking for the quiet whispers. It wasn't about finding answers to her questions about Arthur's absence, but about finding a reason to keep going, to appreciate the beauty that still existed. She began to recall other moments in her life where she'd experienced similar quiet affirmations. The time she'd been agonizing over a difficult decision, and a song with lyrics that seemed to speak directly to her situation had played on the radio. the feeling of inexplicable calm that had washed over her during a particularly stressful period of her children's teenage years. These weren't grand revelations, but subtle confirmations that she wasn't alone, that there was a gentle hand guiding her even when she couldn't see it. She started to wonder if she had been too focused on the silence, on the absence, and had missed the subtle murmurs of divine presence all around her. One evening, while helping Martha prepare dinner, Eleanor found herself humming a tune she hadn't thought of in years. It was an old hymn, one Arthur used to love. As she hummed, she felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of comfort that was both familiar and new. It wasn't the vibrant joy of her youth, but a quiet, steady peace, like the embers of a dying fire still holding residual heat. Martha paused, a knowing smile on her face. "That was Arthur's favorite," she said softly. Eleanor nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. But this time, they felt different. They weren't tears of pure despair, but tears of remembrance, of connection, of a love that transcended even death. She realized that these memories, these echoes of Arthur, weren't just painful reminders of what she'd lost. They were also tangible threads of the life they had shared, threads that still held warmth and meaning. She saw that the hymn, a simple melody, was a bridge between her present loneliness and the enduring love she had known. The following week, Eleanor decided it was time to go home. The thought of returning to the house she'd shared with Arthur for so long filled her with a mixture of dread and a strange anticipation. Martha offered to accompany her, but Eleanor politely declined. She needed to do this alone. She needed to confront the silence of her home, to sift through the remnants of their life together, and to see if she could find the quiet whispers Arthur had spoken of, not just in the world outside, but within the walls that held so many memories. As she packed her small suitcase, she felt a sense of resolve she hadn't experienced since Arthur's passing. It was a fragile resolve, easily broken, but it was there. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, her face etched with grief, but her eyes held a new depth, a quiet understanding. She was no longer simply a widow lost in sorrow. She was a woman searching for God in the silence, a woman willing to listen, even to the faintest of whispers. The drive back was different. The familiar landscape, once a source of pain, now seemed to hold a quiet beauty. Eleanor found herself noticing the way the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, the stoic grace of the ancient farmhouses dotting the countryside, the steadfast march of the telephone poles along the road. She still felt the ache of Arthur's absence, a constant companion, but it no longer consumed her. It was as if the grief had found a place to reside within her, a quiet room in the house of her heart, rather than the entire structure collapsing. She was no longer fighting against it, but learning to coexist with it. She recalled a passage from Arthur's journal where he described learning to live with a chronic illness. He wrote, "It's not about conquering the pain, Eleanor. It's about learning to dance with it, to find moments of joy in its shadow." The idea resonated deeply with her. She was learning to dance with her grief, to find those moments of joy in its shadow. Arriving home was like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was as Arthur had left it, a silent testament to the abruptness of his departure. His slippers were by his favorite armchair, a half-finished crossword puzzle lay on the side table, and his reading glasses rested on top of the open Bible, marking his place. The air was still, heavy with the scent of dust and the ghost of his presence. Eleanor walked through the room slowly, her heart aching with each step. She touched his belongings, not with the desperate longing of before, but with a gentle reverence. She sat in his armchair, the worn fabric molding to her body, and closed her eyes. She listened to the silence, trying to discern if there was anything beyond the emptiness. She thought about the years they had spent in this house, building a life together, filled with laughter, tears, and the quiet hum of everyday existence. She remembered the many times they had sat in this very room, discussing their dreams, their worries, their faith. As she sat there, a faint memory surfaced. It was a Sunday morning, years ago, when their children were still young and boisterous. The house had been chaotic, filled with the usual Sunday morning rush. Arthur, usually so calm, had been visibly agitated about something at work. Eleanor had felt the familiar stress rising within her, the the feeling of being overwhelmed. She remembered him looking at her, his eyes filled with a shared exhaustion, and then he had simply reached out and taken her hand. He hadn't said anything profound, no grand pronouncement of comfort. It was just a simple gesture, a silent acknowledgement of their shared burden. And in that moment, the chaos had seemed to recede, replaced by a quiet strength that flowed between them. She realized now that those small, unspoken gestures of connection were the foundations of their faith, the silent affirmations of God's presence in their everyday lives. That evening, as she made herself a simple meal, Eleanor decided to tackle the attic. It was a place filled with memories, with forgotten treasures and dusty relics of their past. She hadn't been up there since before Arthur's illness. Climbing the creaking stairs, she felt a sense of trepidation. The attic was a repository of their shared history, a place where the past felt more tangible. As she opened the door, a musty smell wafted down, a scent of aged paper and forgotten dreams. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light filtering through a grimy window. She began to sort through boxes, each one a potential Pandora's box of emotions. She found old photographs, children's artwork, holiday decorations, and stacks of letters tied with faded ribbons. Each item brought a wave of memories, some sweet, some tinged with sadness, but none overwhelming. She was approaching them with a newfound perspective, one of quiet acceptance. Deep within a large, unmarked trunk, Eleanor found a collection of Arthur's old sermon notes. He had been a lay preacher in their younger years, his passion for sharing the word of God evident in every handwritten page. She sat down on the dusty floorboards, the musty air filling her lungs, and began to read. His words, full of youthful fervor and conviction, spoke of God's enduring love, of his unwavering presence even in the face of hardship. He wrote about the importance of perseverance, of holding on to faith even when the path ahead seemed uncertain. One particular passage caught her eye. He was describing a time when he felt utterly lost, like a ship without a rudder, tossed about by the storms of life. He wrote, "I searched for answers in the grand pronouncements, in the dramatic interventions, but God's voice was not in the thunder, but in the quiet stillness that followed. It was in the gentle reassurance that I was not alone, that I was held even when I felt most abandoned." Eleanor reread Arthur's words, a slow smile spreading across her face. This was it. This was the quiet whisper he'd spoken of. It wasn't about grand miracles or thunderous pronouncements. It was about the persistent, gentle presence of God woven into the fabric of everyday life. It was in the shared glance with a loved one, the unexpected beauty of a sunrise, the quiet comfort of a familiar song. It was in the very words Arthur had written down decades ago, still resonating with truth. She realized that she had been so focused on the absence of Arthur's physical presence, on the deafening silence, that she had overlooked the subtle, persistent voice of God speaking through the ordinary. The attic, once a place of daunting memories, was now transforming into a sanctuary of rediscovery. The dust of the past was beginning to shimmer with the light of present grace. Later that evening, sitting in her living room, the silence no longer felt oppressive. It was a different kind of silence, one filled with the echoes of shared life and the quiet hum of divine presence. She picked up Arthur's Bible, the one he'd been reading before he passed. His reading glasses still rested on the open page. She looked at the passage he had marked, a verse from Psalm 46:10. "Be still and know that I am God." She had read that verse countless times before, but today it felt like a revelation. It wasn't a command to simply be quiet, but an invitation to rest, to cease striving, and to recognize the divine presence that was always there, even in the midst of life's storms. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since Arthur's passing, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't the absence of sadness, but a deep, abiding calm that permeated her very being. The next morning, Eleanor woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. The ache of grief was still present, a dull throb in her chest, but it no longer dictated her every moment. She looked out the window and saw the early morning mist clinging to the fields, a soft, ethereal blanket. It was a scene of quiet beauty, a gentle awakening of the day. She remembered Arthur's words from his journal, Even when the night seems endless, dawn will break. She understood now that dawn didn't always come with a dramatic fanfare. Sometimes it was a slow, quiet unfolding of light. She decided to make breakfast, not just for herself, but to honor Arthur's memory. As she prepared his favorite scrambled eggs, she found herself humming the old hymn again, the melody a comfort and a source of quiet strength. She began to re-engage with the world, not with the desperate urgency of trying to escape her grief, but with a gentle curiosity. She started attending her small community church again, not seeking grand pronouncements, but simply to be present, to feel the shared fellowship of a community that understood loss. During one of the sermons, the pastor spoke about how God often works through the ordinary, through the mundane moments of our lives, revealing His presence in subtle ways. He mentioned how, just as a farmer watches over his crops, trusting in the unseen process of growth, we too must learn to trust in God's quiet work in our lives, even when we cannot see the immediate results. Eleanor felt a sense of connection to his words, a confirmation of the path she was slowly discovering. One afternoon, while watering the plants on her porch, Eleanor noticed a small robin hopping on the lawn. It was pecking at the ground, searching for worms. She remembered Arthur's fascination with birds, how he'd often point them out to her, marveling at their resilience and their ability to find sustenance even in the harshest conditions. As she watched the robin, she felt a surge of gratitude, a quiet thankfulness for the simple beauty of nature, for the enduring cycle of life. It was a small moment, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but it brought her a sense of peace, a reminder that life continued, that beauty persisted, and that God's presence was evident in these small, everyday wonders. She started writing in a new journal, not of her grief, but of her observations, of the quiet whispers she was beginning to hear. She wrote about the kindness of her neighbors, the warmth of the sun on her skin, the taste of a perfectly ripe peach. She documented the small moments of grace that peppered her days, the subtle affirmations that reminded her she was not alone. One entry read, "Today, a gentle rain fell, washing away the dust and leaving the world refreshed." It felt like a cleansing, a reminder that even after the hardest storms, renewal is always possible. I think Arthur would have loved this rain. She was learning to see the world through a lens of gratitude, to find the divine in the everyday. Her relationship with her children also began to shift. While they still grieved Arthur in their own ways, Eleanor found herself able to connect with them on a deeper level. She shared Arthur's journal with them, not to dwell on their father's struggles, but to show them his humanity, his own journey of faith, and the quiet ways he found God's presence. They were moved by his honesty, by the realization that their strong father had also wrestled with doubt and fear. It opened up new avenues of conversation, allowing them to share their own vulnerabilities and to find solace in their shared experience of loss and faith. Months turned into a year. The sharp edges of Eleanor's grief had softened considerably, replaced by a gentle, enduring love. She still missed Arthur terribly, the ache of his absence a constant reminder of their shared life. But now, that ache was interwoven with a profound sense of peace and a renewed faith. She understood that her faith wasn't a shield against suffering, but a companion through it. It was the quiet presence that held her hand, whispered words of comfort, and reminded her that even in the darkest of times, God was still in control, orchestrating a plan that was beyond her immediate understanding. She found herself back in the old church pew, the one where she had sat in such despair after Arthur's passing. This time, however, the silence was different. It was a sacred silence, filled with the echoes of her journey, with the quiet understanding that God's presence was not limited to moments of joy or answered prayers, but was a constant, unwavering force in her life. As the organ music swelled, she looked at the empty space beside her, not with a pang of unbearable loss, but with a quiet sense of gratitude for the memories they had shared, and a deep certainty that Arthur and their faith were still with her in spirit. One Sunday morning, as the congregation prepared to leave after the service, a young woman approached Eleanor. She had tears in her eyes and clutched a tattered photograph. "Mrs. Davies," she began, her voice trembling, I lost my husband last month. I feel so lost. I heard you speak at the community center last week about finding hope after loss, I don't know where to begin." Eleanor's heart went out to the young woman, recognizing the raw pain in her eyes. She remembered her own despair, the feeling of being utterly adrift. She placed a gentle hand on the woman's arm. "It's okay to feel lost," Eleanor said softly. "It's okay to not have all the answers. But know this, even when everything feels like it's fallen apart, God is still there. He's there in the quiet moments, in the small acts of kindness, in the strength you find you never knew you had." Eleanor continued, her voice gaining a gentle strength. "It's not about finding grand miracles, my dear. It's about learning to hear the quiet whispers. It's about looking for the light, even in the darkest of nights. It's about trusting that even when you feel abandoned, you are held. You just have to be still enough to feel it." She paused, her gaze steady and compassionate. "If you'd like to talk more, I'm here. We can share our stories, and maybe, just maybe, we can find a little bit of hope together." The young woman's shoulders relaxed slightly, a flicker of something other than despair in her eyes. Eleanor knew that this was a part of her journey, a way to honor Arthur's legacy of faith and resilience, and to help others navigate the same path she had once feared was impassable. She often thought about Arthur's final words to her, spoken just hours before he slipped away. He had squeezed her hand, his breath shallow, and whispered, "Eleanor, don't fear the silence. Listen closely." At the time, she had been too overwhelmed with grief to truly grasp their meaning. But now she understood. The silence wasn't an absence of God, but an invitation to hear Him more clearly. It was in the stillness that His voice could finally be heard, a gentle assurance that He was always present, always in control, even when life felt like it was unraveling. Her life wasn't without its challenges. There were still days when the weight of grief felt heavy, days when the memories threatened to pull her back into the darkness. But now, she had a compass. She had the quiet whispers of faith to guide her, the enduring love of her family to sustain her, and the unwavering knowledge that even when everything seemed lost, God remained in control. She had learned to live with her grief, not by erasing it, but by weaving it into the tapestry of her life, a testament to the love she had shared and the faith that had carried her through. Eleanor often visited Arthur's grave, not to mourn the life that was lost, but to reflect on the life they had built together, a life rich with love and guided by faith. She would sit there for a while, not in silence, but in quiet contemplation, listening to the wind rustling through the leaves, the distant call of a bird, the steady rhythm of her own breathing. These were the sounds of life, the subtle affirmations of God's continuous presence. She would leave feeling not saddened, but uplifted, carrying with her the peace that comes from knowing that love and faith endure beyond all understanding. The journey from despair to hope had not been a straight line, but a winding path marked by moments of profound sadness and unexpected glimmers of grace. Eleanor had learned that faith wasn't about avoiding hardship, but about finding strength within it. It was about recognizing God's hand, not always in the grand displays, but in the quiet, persistent murmurs of His love that echoed in the ordinary moments of life. She had rediscovered her faith, not by finding new answers, but by learning to trust in the questions, and in the quiet assurance that, even when she couldn't see the path, God was always leading her forward. Her story and the stories of others like her serve as a beacon of hope. They remind us that even in the deepest sorrow, even when it feels like all has been taken away, there is a divine presence that remains constant. It's a presence that doesn't always speak in thunder, but often in the quietest of whispers, in the resilience of the human spirit, and in the enduring power of love. If you've been touched by this story, or if you're currently navigating your own journey through loss, know that you are not alone. Like Eleanor, you have the strength within you to find hope again. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories and messages of faith that will uplift your spirit and guide you on your path. Eleanor's transformation was a testament to the enduring power of faith, a quiet strength that emerged from the ashes of her grief. She had once believed that God had forgotten her, that her prayers had gone unanswered. But through her journey, she discovered that God's presence was not contingent on her understanding or her immediate comfort. It was a steadfast, unwavering love that had always been there, patiently waiting for her to still her heart and listen to his quiet whispers. She learned that even when all seems lost, when the world feels irrevocably broken, the truest message is this: God continues to be in control, weaving his plan with threads of grace and hope, even in the most difficult of circumstances. If this message has resonated with you, please leave a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your engagement helps us reach more people with these life-affirming stories. The hushed silence of the early morning was a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed Eleanor's life just days before. The sterile scent of the hospital still clung to her clothes, a phantom reminder of the beeping machines and the doctor's somber pronouncement. Her husband, her anchor, her laughter, was gone. The house, once filled with the comforting rhythm of his presence, now echoed with an emptiness so profound it felt like a physical ache in her chest. Every object, from the worn armchair where he'd read his evening paper to the coffee mug still bearing the faint imprint of his lips, was a painful monument to what was lost. Grief, a tide she hadn't anticipated, threatened to drown her. She sat by the window, watching the sun paint the sky in hues of rose and gold, a beauty that felt utterly alien. It was a dawn of a new reality, one she was terrifyingly ill-equipped to navigate. The pastor's words from the wake, "When the wind whispers your name, do not fear," felt like a cruel mockery now. The wind a mournful dirge that only amplified her isolation. She closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, wondering if she'd ever find a way to breathe again in this vast, unyielding silence. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience and faith. Days bled into weeks, each one a blurry continuation of the last. Eleanor moved through her days like a ghost in her own life, performing the necessary motions of existence without truly living. The casseroles from well-meaning neighbors piled up, their condolences a soft murmur that barely registered. The emptiness in the house wasn't just about the absence of a person. It was the absence of a future they had planned together, the dreams they had nurtured, the quiet companionship that had been the bedrock of her world. She'd look at their wedding photos, a young woman brimming with optimism, and the contrast with her present self was a chasm too wide to bridge. The simplest tasks, like making dinner for one or watering the plants he'd meticulously cared for, felt monumental. She found herself replaying conversations, searching for missed signs, for words left unsaid, for any explanation that could make sense of this abrupt ending. The faith that had always been a quiet comfort now felt distant, a faint echo in the chambers of her despair. She'd whisper prayers into the darkness, but the silence that answered was deafening, amplifying the feeling that God, too, had turned his face away. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of his old belongings, Eleanor found a small, leather-bound journal. It was filled with his familiar handwriting, not of grand pronouncements, but of simple observations, of gratitude for the small things. He wrote about the way the sunlight fell on the kitchen table in the morning, about the joy he found in her smile, about how her presence made even the most mundane moments feel extraordinary. He hadn't written about grand philosophies or theological debates. He had written about her. A fragile sense of connection, a thread woven through the years of their shared life, began to emerge from the pages. It wasn't a sudden revelation, but a slow, gentle unfolding, like a flower tentatively opening its petals to the sun. She realized that his love hadn't vanished. It had simply transformed, leaving behind a legacy of warmth and quiet devotion. The journal became her solace, a whispered conversation with a man who was no longer physically present, but whose spirit still lingered in the words he'd left behind. The journal entries continued to offer small comforts. One passage spoke of a particularly difficult time in his youth, a period of profound doubt and loneliness after losing his father. He described feeling utterly adrift, convinced that he was alone in his struggle. Yet, he wrote of a moment, in the quiet of a starry night, when he felt an undeniable sense of peace wash over him. He couldn't explain it, but in that moment, he felt seen, understood, and for the first time in a long time, not afraid. He'd written, "It was as if the stars themselves were whispering that I was not alone, that a larger plan was at work, even when I couldn't see it." Reading this, Eleanor felt a flicker of recognition. Hadn't she felt that same gnawing isolation? And had she, too, experienced moments, however fleeting, when a strange sense of calm had settled upon her, even amidst her deepest sorrow? Inspired by her husband's words, Eleanor began to approach her grief differently. Instead of resisting the sadness, she started to acknowledge it, to sit with it, and to look for the subtle signs that her husband had described finding. She started to pay attention to the small things. The way a robin sang its cheerful tune outside her window each morning, the scent of rain on dry earth, the warmth of the sun on her skin. These weren't earth-shattering events, but they were moments. Moments of beauty, of life, of continuity in a world that had felt so abruptly interrupted. She realized that perhaps the pastor's words weren't about a loud, booming voice, but about a subtle whisper, a gentle reassurance in the quietude of her own heart, and in the enduring beauty of the world around her. One evening, as she was preparing a simple meal, Eleanor found herself humming an old hymn, one her grandmother used to sing. The melody, long dormant in her memory, surfaced with surprising clarity. It was a song of unwavering trust, of finding strength in times of tribulation. As she hummed, she felt a warmth spread through her, a familiar feeling of being held, of being loved. It was as if the song itself was a conduit, connecting her to generations of women who had faced loss and found solace in their faith. She remembered her grandmother telling her, "When your heart feels like a stone, let the old songs remind you of the rivers of grace that flow." She had dismissed it then as grandmotherly wisdom, but now, in the quiet of her kitchen, the words resonated with a profound truth. The following week, while visiting her sister, Eleanor found herself drawn to the garden. Her sister, a devoted gardener, spoke with such passion about her plants, about the cycles of growth and renewal. Eleanor watched, mesmerized, as her sister explained how even the most withered-looking plant held the potential for new life, how with the right care and a little patience, it could bloom again. "Sometimes," her sister said, her hands deep in the soil, "you have to let go of the dead leaves to make space for new growth. It's not about forgetting, it's about allowing life to continue." Eleanor looked at the vibrant colors surrounding her, the resilient green shoots pushing through the earth, and felt a stirring within her. Her own life felt barren, but perhaps, like these plants, there was still a possibility for renewal, a seed of hope waiting to sprout. The weight of her grief remained, a constant companion, but it was no longer the only voice in her head. The small moments of connection, the echoes of her husband's love, the gentle hum of the old hymn, the quiet resilience of the garden, they were all building, like tiny pebbles accumulating to form a new landscape within her. She began to notice patterns, not of loss, but of presence. A cardinal landing on the feeder just as she thought of her husband. A rainbow appearing after a brief, cleansing rain shower. These weren't grand miracles, but they felt like soft affirmations, gentle reminders that she was not entirely alone in her journey. One evening, as Eleanor sat by the fireplace, the journal open on her lap, she read a passage that spoke of her husband's own early struggles with doubt. He confessed to feeling a profound sense of abandonment during a particularly challenging period in his career. He had sought answers in many places, but it was in the quiet contemplation of nature and in the unwavering support of his family that he had found his way back to faith. He wrote, "I thought God had forgotten me, that my prayers were lost in the void. But then, in the stillness, I heard a whisper, not of words, but of a deep, abiding peace that told me I was held." This resonated deeply with Eleanor. She too had felt that she had been forgotten, that her pleas had gone unanswered. The idea that God might communicate in silence, in stillness, began to take root in Eleanor's mind. She had always associated faith with audible prayers, with clear answers, with grand interventions. But her husband's journal, her sister's garden, the simple beauty of nature, they all seemed to point towards a different kind of divine communication. A communication that didn't rely on booming voices or dramatic signs, but on a subtle presence, a quiet assurance that permeated the fabric of existence. She started to actively seek out these moments of stillness, to carve out time in her day to simply be, to observe, to listen to the silence. During one of these quiet moments, while sitting on a park bench, A young mother with two boisterous children sat down nearby. The children, initially loud and demanding, soon began to squabble. The mother, instead of scolding them harshly, knelt down and spoke to them in a soft, reassuring voice, her hand gently stroking their hair. She didn't solve their problems instantly, but she created an atmosphere of understanding and empathy. Eleanor watched, struck by the mother's patience and her ability to diffuse the situation with love. It was a small, everyday scene, but it felt like a profound lesson in divine interaction. God's love, she realized, wasn't always about immediate solutions. It was about presence, about gentle guidance, about offering a safe harbor even in the midst of childish storms. Eleanor began to incorporate small acts of kindness into her routine, mirroring the gentle spirit she was cultivating. She started volunteering at the local animal shelter, finding solace in the unconditional affection of the creatures there. She helped an elderly neighbor with her groceries and found a quiet satisfaction in easing her burden. These weren't grand gestures, but they were extensions of the love and connection she was beginning to feel within herself. She realized that by extending compassion outwards, she was also nurturing the nascent hope within her own heart. It was a reciprocal flow, a deepening of her capacity for both giving and receiving. One particularly challenging day, when the weight of her loss felt almost unbearable, Eleanor found herself staring blankly at the ceiling. The familiar ache of loneliness returned with a vengeance. She thought of her husband, of all the shared laughter, the quiet evenings, the future they would never have. Tears welled up, hot and stinging. Just as she felt herself spiraling into despair, her cat, a creature of independent spirit, jumped onto her chest and began to purr, its body a warm, vibrating presence against hers. It wasn't a divine voice, but in that moment, the simple, unconditional comfort of the animal felt like a balm to her soul, a tangible reminder that she was not entirely alone. The journal entries continued to be a source of strength, and Eleanor started to see a recurring theme: her husband's appreciation for the quiet strength of women. He wrote of his admiration for his mother's resilience in the face of adversity and for the unwavering support of Eleanor herself. He described her as his calm in the storm, his constant light. Reading these words, Eleanor felt a surge of self-worth, a recognition that her own strength, though tested and battered, had not been extinguished. It was a reminder that she possessed an inner fortitude that she had perhaps underestimated. She began to seek out stories of other women who had faced profound loss and had found their way to hope. She read articles, listened to podcasts, and found herself drawn to narratives of quiet perseverance. These weren't tales of miraculous recovery, but of ordinary women navigating extraordinary pain with grace and courage. She saw echoes of her own journey in their struggles and triumphs, a shared human experience of brokenness and the slow, arduous process of healing. The more she learned, the more she realized that her feelings of isolation were not unique, and that there was a collective strength to be found in shared vulnerability. The concept of signs began to take on a new meaning for Eleanor. She had always thought of signs as grand, obvious declarations from the divine, but now she began to see them in the subtler occurrences of her daily life. A specific song playing on the radio when she was thinking of a particular memory. The unexpected appearance of a cherished flower. These weren't random events. They felt like gentle nudges, whispers of reassurance from a loving presence. It was as if the universe was conspiring to remind her that she was seen, that she was loved, and that she was not walking this path alone. One crisp autumn evening, as Eleanor walked through a park, she noticed a group of children playing. Their laughter, light and unrestrained, filled the air. One little girl, chasing a butterfly, stumbled and fell. Eleanor's instinct was to rush to her aid, but before she could move, the child's mother was there, her arms scooping the little one up. The mother spoke softly, not in a scolding tone, but with gentle concern, and the child, after a moment of tears, was soon giggling again, pointing at the butterfly. The scene was simple, yet profound. It spoke of the immediate, instinctual nature of love and care, of how a gentle touch and a reassuring voice could mend a small hurt and restore joy. Eleanor started to experiment with her own moments of stillness, intentionally seeking out quiet spaces and times. She found that early mornings, before the world fully awoke, were particularly conducive to this practice. She would sit with a cup of tea and simply observe. The gentle stirring of the leaves outside her window, the soft glow of the rising sun, the quiet hum of the house settling. In these moments, she began to feel a sense of peace, not the absence of sadness, but a deep, abiding calm that permeated her being. It was as if the stillness itself was a sanctuary. She remembered a conversation with her husband about dreams. He had a vivid imagination and often spoke of dreams that felt remarkably real, offering insights or premonitions. Eleanor, on the other hand, rarely remembered her dreams. But lately, something had shifted. She began to have dreams that were not chaotic or frightening, but strangely peaceful, filled with familiar landscapes and a sense of comforting presence. In one dream, she walked hand in hand with her husband through a sun-dappled meadow, the air alive with the scent of wildflowers. He didn't speak, but his presence was a palpable reassurance, a silent confirmation that love transcended even the veil of sleep. The journal continued to offer her comfort and guidance. One entry detailed a period when her husband had felt overwhelmed by a daunting professional challenge. He had felt inadequate, believing he wasn't capable of succeeding. He wrote about how, in his despair, he had found solace in the unwavering belief of a close friend, a belief that had served as a mirror, reflecting back his own hidden potential. Sometimes, he had written, we need someone to see the strength in us when we can no longer see it ourselves. It's not about external validation, but about a gentle reminder of our own inner resilience. Eleanor began to share her journey with a trusted friend, a woman who had also experienced significant loss. In their conversations, Eleanor found a shared understanding that transcended mere sympathy. They spoke of the nuances of grief, the unexpected waves of sadness, the moments of fleeting joy, and the slow, often imperceptible, process of healing. Her friend's empathy was a powerful affirmation, a reminder that she was not alone in her struggles, and that human connection was a vital element in navigating the darkest of times. The transition from a life filled with her husband's presence to one without it was a gradual recalibration. Eleanor started to notice how her own presence in the world was changing. She was no longer defined by her role as a wife in the same way. This shift, though initially unsettling, also offered a sense of liberation. It was an invitation to explore who Eleanor was, independent of her shared identity. She realized that God's presence wasn't limited to her grief. It was also present in this unfolding of her own individual self. One afternoon, while walking through the bustling city, Eleanor observed a street musician playing a soulful melody on his saxophone. People rushed by, caught up in their own lives, many not even noticing the beautiful music. But a few, drawn by the melody, paused, their faces softening, their steps slowing. For those brief moments, the music created a shared space of connection, a silent acknowledgement of beauty and emotion in the midst of the everyday rush. Eleanor felt a kinship with those who paused, recognizing that divine presence could also be found in shared moments of appreciation for art and beauty, even in the most ordinary of settings. The journal entries also offered glimpses into her husband's faith, revealing a man who wrestled with questions but always returned to a deep-seated trust. He wrote about his belief that even in periods of apparent darkness, God was orchestrating a larger plan, a symphony of events that would ultimately lead to good. I might not understand the individual notes, he'd penned, but I have faith in the composer's intention, that the melody will be beautiful in the end. This perspective offered Eleanor a new way to view her own suffering, not as an endpoint, but as a passage towards something greater, even if the path was obscured. Her dreams continued to evolve, becoming more vibrant and offering subtle affirmations. In one dream, she saw herself standing at the edge of a vast, calm ocean, the waves gently lapping at her feet. As she looked out, she saw a distant light, a beacon of hope on the horizon. Her husband was by her side, his presence a reassuring warmth. He didn't need to say anything. His quiet strength conveyed a message of peace and unwavering support, a silent promise that even in the face of immense vastness, she was guided and protected. Eleanor started to actively seek out moments of reflection and gratitude. She kept a small notebook by her bedside, jotting down small things she was thankful for each day. It could be as simple as the taste of her morning coffee, the warmth of the sun, or a kind word from a stranger. This practice, she found, shifted her focus from what was missing to what was present, gradually reorienting her perspective and cultivating a deeper appreciation for the blessings, however small, that remained in her life. One day, while visiting a local craft fair, Eleanor was drawn to a stall selling handmade pottery. The artisan explained how each piece, though imperfect, held a unique beauty, a testament to the hands that shaped it. She spoke of how sometimes the most beautiful creations emerged from unexpected challenges, from the need to adapt and overcome. Eleanor looked at a slightly asymmetrical bowl, its glaze a rich, earthy tone. She saw not flaws, but character, a reflection of the resilience that could be found in imperfection. It was a metaphor for her own life, a realization that healing wasn't about returning to her former self, but about embracing the new, uniquely shaped person she was becoming. The theme of whispers from her husband's journal became a recurring motif in her own internal dialogue. She realized that the divine wasn't always about loud pronouncements. It was often in the gentle nudges, the intuitive feelings, the quiet reassurances that surfaced when she was open to receiving them. She started to trust these inner whispers, to lean into them, recognizing them as echoes of a loving presence guiding her steps, even when the path ahead was unclear. The passage of time had brought a softening to her grief, not an erasure, but a transformation. The sharp edges of pain had begun to round, replaced by a more gentle ache, intertwined with a growing sense of peace. She could recall her husband with love and fondness, without the immediate sting of his absence. It was a testament to the healing power of time, and to her own conscious effort to embrace hope amidst her sorrow. One afternoon, while sitting in her garden, the sun warm on her face, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't a fleeting moment, but a deep, abiding calm that filled her entire being. She looked up at the sky, a brilliant expanse of blue dotted with fluffy white clouds, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She realized that the silence, which had once been a source of dread, had become a sanctuary. In that stillness, she could hear the gentle whisper of God's presence, a constant reminder that even in her deepest loss, she was never truly alone. The pastor's words from the wake, "When the wind whispers your name, do not fear," now held a different meaning. The wind still whispered, but it was no longer a mournful lament. It was a gentle caress, a soft reminder of life's continuity, of the enduring presence of love, and of the quiet strength that resided within her. She understood now that fear was not the absence of pain, but the absence of faith. And in her journey through loss, she had found her faith. Eleanor looked at her reflection in the window. The lines on her face told a story of hardship and resilience. Her eyes, once clouded with despair, now held a quiet strength, a spark of hope. She had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and though the scars remained, she had emerged, not broken, but transformed. The journey had been arduous, marked by moments of profound sadness, but it had also been illuminated by unexpected moments of grace, by the subtle whispers of divine love that had guided her through the darkness. The emptiness had not been filled, but it had been softened, interwoven with a newfound peace. She understood now that her husband's passing, while a devastating loss, had also been a catalyst. It had forced her to confront her deepest fears and to rediscover a strength she never knew she possessed. The journey of grief had been a crucible, refining her spirit and revealing the enduring presence of God in the quietude, in the everyday moments, in the unwavering whisper of His love. She realized that even when everything seemed to be over, God was still in control, His plan unfolding in ways she could never have imagined. If you've been touched by this story, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below.